Just letting folks know that this is going to be recorded. And if you don't want your face to be on camera, just turn your camera off. Also, captions are available. So if you would like to access captions, please go to the bottom of your screen and click on the live transcript option, and that will turn captions on or off for you. And we are also going to be sharing a transcript of this event. So that will be available after the fact. And we will be sure to scrub identifying information from anyone who asks a question. So you don't have to worry that your name will appear on the transcript, because it won't. I'll repeat all of this in a couple of minutes. We'll just let a few more folks join us, and then we'll get underway. Okay, I don't see any new participants joining, so I think we will get started. So welcome everyone. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping things after I do a land acknowledgement, so I'd like to start with that. So this is our land recognition statement. We recognize that our neighborhoods are situated upon Indigenous territories. The territories include those belonging traditionally to the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha, and the Alderville First Nation. The treaties signed for these particular parcels of land include the Toronto Purchase, which applies to lands east of Brown's Line to Woodbine Avenue and north towards Newmarket, and the Williams Treaties of 1923, which applies to lands east of Woodbine Avenue. We recognize that settler colonialism is the foundation of power structures that result in racism in this country, and we uphold the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on these lands. So welcome everyone. So a little bit of housekeeping, which I said as a few people were coming in. We do have captions available, so if you'd like to access the captions, please click on the transcript button at the bottom of your screen. You can turn the captions on and off. This event is also being recorded. If you don't want your face to appear on camera, it won't, because only the speakers are being highlighted, but you can also choose to keep your video camera off for your privacy. We'll also be making a transcript available after the fact. And if anyone is asking any questions during this session, we're going to be scrubbing names and identifying information from that transcript. So don't worry, your name or your location will not be shared publicly. So I am really happy to welcome everybody here to this Lunch and Learn. We'll have all of the candidates here introduce themselves, so I'm not going to give any kind of extensive bios, but I want to thank all three of you for coming and sharing information about yourself and your campaigns. And this really is meant to be a dialogue, a Q&A, really hoping that everyone here has brought some questions, or some questions will come up for you while everyone is speaking. And so I would like to start with Alexis Dawson. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us what ward you're in, what you're running for, and tell us a bit about your campaign in a few minutes.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name's Alexis Dawson, and my ward is a little more west than the East End. So I'm running in TDSB Ward 9, which starts at Eglinton in the north, and then goes west to Keele, south to the island, and then sort of dips back around to West Donlands. So it's quite a huge ward. It encompasses city councillor wards 9, so Davenport, as well as Spadina and Fort York. So very diverse communities. I live in Davenport. I've lived here for 25 years. I live in closer to Oakwood and Rogers, so Little Jamaica area. I have 2 kids in the TDSB, and I've been the chair of their school council for for 7 years approximately, apart from a brief stint that I spent on the school board. So I was the interim trustee between the provincial elections in the last term and the municipal election. My MPP is Marit Stiles, who is the education critic. So she was formerly the trustee. So I filled in for her in that interim period. I'm very active in my community, and professionally, I work with schools, mainly in the TDSB, through their school council. So I do anti-racism workshops for parents and staff. I've worked with a number of schools in the East End. And I also do school improvement planning. So a school improvement plan is basically the business plan of the school. The schools are all required to set out goals in the areas of equity, well-being, and achievement. And there's a parent engagement piece to that really is what I do. And that's kind of part of what I'm hoping to bring to the school board. I feel like there's a, I know that there is a disconnect between the community and the policies happening at the board and how they're actually enacted in schools, whether they're functional, how they're being implemented. So, community voice is a big part of my platform. I'm also very concerned with the impact of the pandemic. So addressing the needs around learning loss and particularly mental health, the impact that has had on students, and making sure that students and families are feeling supported and accessing the resources that they need to address those things. Equity is a big part, obviously, of my work and my career, but I feel very passionately about addressing the inequities within our school system. And a big part of that work involves data collection. So I'm very already immersed in that sort of data work. That's part of my the foundation of my school improvement planning and equity work with schools. So I've really delved deep into the data around equity in our neighborhoods across the city. And I think that has provided me with a well-rounded perspective to tackle this work at the board. And in addition to the school council, I also chair the Black Student Achievement Community Advisory Committee at the TDSB, which is exactly what it sounds like it is, a committee of parents, educators, and community networks that bring voice to the table on behalf of Black students. And I also sit on a board called the Ontario Alliance of Black School Educators. So in that role, I work directly with the unions and the provincial government, the Ministry of Education, on addressing policy and practice issues relating to supporting Black students and educators. So that's a bit about me. I look forward to your questions. I look forward to learning more from my colleagues just about the East End in general. Like I said, it's not fully my catchment area, but I am going to be representing all of our collective interests as the trustee. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Alexis. I already have questions, so I'm excited to get into the Q&A. Next, I'd like to introduce Sara Ehrhardt, who will speak a little bit about her campaign for trustee.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. If not, just indicate through the chat. My name's Sara Ehrhardt, and I'm running to be TDSB Public School Trustee in the Toronto Danforth Ward. It's the School Ward 15, and it starts Coxwell West, and from the water along the Don Valley, which borders it through the west and the north. And there are roughly 40 schools in the catchment, but unlike Alexis, it's a very well-defined area. It's clean boundaries, but we do have kids that bus in from parts of what I hope will be Alexis's ward to Dundas East School, and there will, I believe, need to be a lot of work in the future around the growing developments in the Portland areas between our areas to make sure that area has good equitable school coverage over time. So I stepped forward late July, shortly after I learned that our current trustee Jennifer Story wouldn't be running again. And so I'll say frankly, this was not in my plan for this year, but I'm excited and passionate and energized to step forward. I have been involved in community organizing in the East End since I moved here in 2015, and I've been a member of ETYM Village since I moved. And I want to just thank everybody in this group for being a community that supported me when I moved here from Sweden. I'm a Canadian citizen, but I had been living in Sweden where I had my child and united our family here in Toronto. This is where I received so much support and so much learning about our East End community. I'm constantly learning from the group, and I'm just really grateful to be in this progressive space with all of you. So by day, I work for the Ontario Public Service. I'm with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and I have degrees in engineering and public policy. And so I'm very hopeful that we will have a school board that is incredibly diverse, where everyone can bring different areas of expertise and work together to make our schools better. And so what I think I would bring to the table here, in addition to a background in East End community organizing, would be how government works. And so I have worked at all orders of government over 20 years. I've worked in various provinces. I worked in the Department of Finance, putting out multi-billion-dollar investment packages to what I do now in the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, preparing documents for cabinet. I'm very comfortable navigating power. And I would like to put that to use and in service to our community and our kids, because I believe it is needed now more than ever for all of our kids and for the future of our public education. And so I feel well positioned to offer something to our community in that respect. My background in engineering, I think, could serve us very well, particularly in the East End with the state of our schools from a facility perspective. And so right now in this COVID moment, we are really looking at air quality in our schools, but also more broadly, our schools have always been environments where we've had to think about their physical safety from an infrastructure perspective, as well as their broader safety and well-being from all like social and emotional and equitable perspectives of safety as well. So I may be adding some of the hard engineering into that spectrum, but it is a full spectrum that we need to be advancing collectively. Within the time I have, I just want to say that I have a lot to learn. I have a child that's in grade 2 at Duke of Connaught School. We were in the virtual school system for the past few years, but during that time, I was able to observe an entire year of school, 2 years, 2 classes, ultimately 3 classes with our bubble. But I was able to see our learning environment day in, day out with that teacher. And it really made me passionate and wanting to do more in our schools. It also showed me potentially who we're missing over the past 2 years, because there are people who for 2 years never had their screen on. There are kids, there are families who for 2 years weren't necessarily showing up. And there are many reasons for that. But it's important these next few years that we know who we're seeing and who we're not seeing as we work to address whatever we want to call it, our plans to catch up, our learning losses, equity in our schools. Yeah, I think I'll close off by saying I'm filled with a lot of energy and hope canvassing. I think there's a lot we can do, even though it does feel really grim, even though I know we are all very tired and it's going to be a long 4 years. It's going to be a hard 4 years in education. And I believe trustee is a role that can chew women up in particular and spit us out. I believe that this is a time where we can get organized to make our schools better. And I know here in the East End, organizing is something we do very well. And I would feel very privileged to be our trustee and to play a critical role in that organizing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so now I'd like to ask Jennie Worden to speak about her campaign for City Councillor.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jennie Worden, and I am running in Ward 19, which aligns roughly with the federal and provincial ridings Beaches East York. The ward goes from the lake up to Sunrise, which is north of O'Connor, near Bermondsey, and it runs from Victoria Park in the east to Coxwell in the west. I am a Beaches East York resident. I live just north of Michael Garron Hospital, and we've been here for about 5 or possibly 6 years. Prior to that, I lived in the Beaches on Woodbine in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I am running on a platform of housing and public space and climate change, and in particular on a platform of we can no longer afford to ignore the crises that are confronting the city. We can no longer afford incremental action on these crises. That is what has made the situation as bad as it and pronounced as it is, and that we as a city deserve better than complacency and ennui. Somebody asked me what one of the biggest political issues in Toronto is right now, and at the door, I mean, I'm hearing a lot about concrete issues like housing and transit, but I'm also hearing a lot of people just feeling disengaged from city politics. Like Sarah, I had not planned to run. I entered this race in July as well. I was hoping that somebody would step up to challenge our incumbent here in Beaches East York and to represent a strong, progressive voice for the things that need doing and for a community that takes care of its most vulnerable residents and that works for all of us. That person did not appear, and I asked a lot of other people, and so I decided that for $100, 25 signatures, and a few months of my life, or possibly 4 years of my life if all goes well, it was my turn to step up and do that. I have a small but dedicated team who are working day and night to keep on top of the various demands on even a council candidate's time. And I look forward, and I've been meeting a lot of neighbors at the door. I look forward to sharing a vision of Beaches East York that is more hopeful and more galvanized and more ready to take on these challenges, because I really believe that as a community, we can do this. Oh, and my background outside of this story is in arts administration. I run a community orchestra, and that means that, among other things, I am really good at getting a lot done without a lot of money.
Thank you, Jennie. Great. So thank you everyone for your intros. And I think at this point, we're going to open it up to Q&A. And in case people need a little bit of time to sort of formulate their questions, we've got a few. So I might just open it up and ask each of you to answer the first question. And then as far as people asking questions, you can either type it into the chat or you can use the raise hand function on Zoom, and I'll call on you when I see you. So think about those questions, but I think let's start. Actually, so I have a little list here. I like this one as a start, and maybe we can go in the same order that you introduced yourselves. So what would you say to those who might be feeling disillusioned or indifferent about this election? And I think we've heard from a few of you as to why people might be feeling that way. So what would you say if people told you that?
You know, like you said, I think it's understandable that people are, especially, you know, parents in schools are feeling burnt out, uncertain about what comes next. You know, but as far as school boards go, I am actually finding that families especially are becoming much more engaged. So over the course of the pandemic, there have been record attendance levels at the board meetings. Part of that is the transition to a virtual or hybrid model for those meetings. So I think it's, you know, it's very helpful and important that we're doing things like this on a virtual platform where people can just, you know, skip out on a lunch break from work and log in. But I think, you know, it's time to get involved, and you can do that at, you know, whatever small level you are able. But we have, you know, to Jenny's point, so many, you know, acute crises in our cities at the local level. And it's important for people to understand those issues and to get involved. And you know, it's interesting, I'm learning so much while campaigning, and I I didn't know before that the population of, you know, people over 65 are the highest percentage of voters. So 80% of people over 65 vote, whereas 30% or less of, you know, younger people vote. So I think it's very important to especially engage, you know, our young people in the opportunity to have their say and the impact that it can have for them as, you know, as students, and community members. So yeah, you know, it's of no surprise that people are becoming disengaged, but I think, you know, when we're campaigning, it's important to ask, do you plan to vote on October the 24th? And when people are hesitant, then we can have those individual conversations and find out why, and the why will inform what we will do once we are elected. So, you know, share your thoughts with us. If you're disillusioned, we want to know, because we want to help to fix that for you. We're, you know, especially for school board trustee, I mean, it's a full-time job and we're making $25,000 a year. So we are incredibly invested in this work, and, you know, for the betterment of our community members and our students. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. Sarah, did you have a response to that question?
Yeah, so everything Alexis says, Alexis going first, and she's just so wonderful that, I mean, I am so excited and hopeful that I might get the opportunity to learn from you and spend more time with you through this campaign, but also beyond, hopefully both as trustees. So I'll take a different piece of that, and I would say for those feeling disillusioned and tired, I'm a person who has struggled with mental health issues my whole life and my energy levels. And I have found for me, one of the solutions to disillusionment is doing a little bit more. Sometimes that's not good. Sometimes with burnout, we have to rest and restore our souls. But when it's disillusionment, not burnout, I step in. And this is definitely a time where I am feeling disillusioned and I'm stepping in, because I find that is where you find your hope and your source of inspiration. And I don't think for anyone here who's feeling like I want to get involved, but it could consume me, there are a lot of ways to get involved. Voting is right now a very important way to get involved, and it doesn't always feel as easy as it could be, but it is a long ballot with a few check marks. We can do it. But there are other ways within our schools that we can get engaged. Within Toronto Danforth in particular, the PAC, the Parent Advisory Committee, that's the legislative committee, we don't currently have any participants. And so there's that. We have other committees at the school board. I am hopeful that we can get re-engaged as an area in these. There are a few EastEnders involved here and there, but I would like to get us re-engaged. And it doesn't have to be all consuming. There are ways that we can work together and get the work done. And I'm really hopeful that we can each take pieces here and there. I'm stepping forward as trustee. If we can get someone to step forward to take part in some of the key committees that we need to have representation on, I'm really hopeful that we can shape the education system that we want.
Great, thank you. Jenny?
I mean, I think the first thing that I have to do is empathize with people. It has been a long 3 years. It has been a tough 3 years. And for those of us in progressive politics, it has been a heartbreaking, I'm going to say 4 years or more. We have seen a lot of heartbreak in municipal politics. The last municipal election left scars in our ranks. And I'm hearing from people that they just don't feel like they have it in them. And I think we have to honor that. We have to honor the contribution. We have to honor the circumstances that have led to these feelings of disengagement. And I also think that we have to find the joy. We have to find the small victories that we've had in our communities, the ways that we connect with each other, and the places where we come together. When I'm talking with tenants, when I'm talking with residents, I look at the places that we love in our communities and I talk about how we can cherish and foster them. I talk about the role of government as something that builds and that creates and that brings people together. I talk about why it is, and this is where I usually gesture broadly around me, but I'm in a bedroom right now. So why it is that we do all of this complicated stuff with streetcars and subways and houses and housing developments and shops. And that is, we come together so that we can make life easier for each other and so that we can meaningfully increase everybody's access to choice. And then we find something to work on together, a little thing, a little project. We talk about a little thing that we're going to do in our community. Maybe we're going to have a tenants meeting at this building so that people can come together and share their grievances and find a path forward. Maybe we talk about how we need to have a youth meeting space and how important that is and how we can take the steps to get there. And we talk about the fact that the work happens whether or not there's an election, and that I will be there whatever happens in this election. And we try to find that spark of joy and that spark of hope, because we're not a movement if we're moving without joy. We're just a death march.
Thank you. I think you need to make pins or something about that. Moving with joy. It's a good one. Yes, dance, campaign dance.
There have to be dance breaks.
Yeah. It's the whole bread and roses thing, right? Like, we need the bread, but we need the roses too.
Absolutely. We need the mandolin orchestras, man.
Okay, so just reminding everyone, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, raise your hand. Otherwise, we did collect a couple in advance, so I will go back to my list, but please keep thinking about your questions. So this one is specifically for Jennie. What would you do to improve pedestrian and cyclist safety? I know that these things are big issues for you.
Coming up a lot. And the first thing I want to do to improve pedestrian and cyclist safety starts with our built environment. It starts with how we build our roads, how we build the spaces where pedestrians, drivers, and cyclists come together. I love me some cycling infrastructure and I love me some pedestrian infrastructure. And I want to see us actually see these features as systems rather than as individual pieces of a puzzle that don't always fit well together. I have been talking with residents all over the ward, and everybody who is on a small straight street would like traffic calming. And I think the city needs to be a lot more creative and also joyful about the way we do traffic calming. People have really divided feelings about speed bumps, and as a cyclist, so do I, because they don't actually make my life safer at all. But I would love to see us use chicanes. I would love to see us have like community gardening competitions within our chicanes. I would love to see us using automated speed cameras as a way to enforce speed. I was reading a study yesterday that says that speeding and collisions go down markedly in areas with automated speed cameras. And I would love to see that happen as a way to deal with the problem of driver aggression in our communities. There are a few spots in our communities that are ripe for actual safe crossings. And I would love to see us do a community safety bike audit where we go through all of our bike routes and look at them from the perspective of, is this getting us where we need to be safely? Could a 7-year-old cycle here unattended? And that means separated bike lanes, none of these stupid flexi bollards that don't actually do anything. The trucks just drive right over, very bad. But that also means controlling speed and controlling density and really enforcing the safety rules that we have. And finally, reducing speed on our neighborhood streets to 30 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, Sarah, did you want to respond? Go ahead.
I didn't want to respond, but permit me just to make the link, both with Toronto Danforth, but also with the trustee role. I should have said at the beginning that I'm very fortunate to have been endorsed by Councillor Paula Fletcher, who's seeking re-election in Toronto Danforth. She's been a champion for traffic calming, for safe streets, and for cycling for years. And I hope we will elect her so that she can continue to be. She knows every square inch of the ward. I'm actively canvassing with her. And as Jenny knows, it's frequently brought up. And Paula hears it, and she has a plan for every street. And for that, I am really impressed and humbled to be alongside when she says that. I also wanted to note that it's really important to work across orders of government, and that's where a trustee role can play a role in this. I was just at a Wilkinson Parent Council meeting where they're asking about what's happening in the space, and that includes a stairwell where they're looking for stroller ramps, and that's used more broadly by the community to access subway. And so there's a lot of linkages, particularly across the East End, between our school infrastructure and our broader municipal infrastructure. And because of how they're organized, we have to talk across different orders of government. But to make it coherent for our families, we have to work together.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for drawing that in. School zones seem like an obvious place for extra physical infrastructure needed to protect children and parents and people who are walking and cycling in those areas. Yeah, great. Okay, a question for Alexis. Actually, it's less of a question and more of just could you speak a little bit more on some of these issues that we know are part of your campaign? So, anti-Black racism in schools is kind of a really big part. Extra support for neurodiverse kids and what is needed and what maybe has been taken away in recent years. And then also if you could touch on the issue of masking in schools.
Okay. All right. So I'll start with the equity piece. I spoke earlier to the data, and really when it comes to, the work around anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism, and this goes for school boards, but also systemically at large in all systems, we know that those two populations have the poorest data outcomes of all populations. So, that equity work is to support and prioritize the need to improve outcomes for those students. And so, I can talk to some of the initiatives that have happened. So again, if I look at data, the TDSB produced their first ever human rights report between 2018 and 2020. So the report was delivered in 2021, and those were, it captured staff complaints within that period, and they found that more than 50% of staff human rights complaints were to do with anti-Black racism. So, that also plays a role with representation in the classroom, teacher representation, the way that teachers feel supported. So, that's kind of one faction, is the educator piece. But then, that data was used to then justify, okay, well, we need to do this work and see what the issues are in our schools so that we can come up with, a student learning strategy to improve on the incidents that are happening in schools related to racism, bias, and hate. And so that is now something that's underway. So the TDSB has launched a human rights reporting portal. And so through that portal, whenever there's an incident in a school of racism, bias, and hate, it is recorded in the portal, but it also triggers a response. And that response is a holistic team response that involves, staff, professional development, restorative practices implemented in the school, so that there's a learning piece tied to it that hopefully will prevent those incidents from happening again through education. And so, that's one thing that's happening. Another thing that's happening, I mean, I could go on and on, but de-streaming has happened in secondary school. It is, it's very difficult as well to get an IEP in the early years. And that is because when we look at why and how Black students and Indigenous students are being targeted, it's always for behavior, subjective opinions of behavior. So we know that, Black students are overwhelmingly represented in suspensions and in expulsions. And when the TDSB looked at the data and the reasons as to why, they discovered that, breach of conduct was the primary reason for suspension of those students. And so, that kind of behavior piece also translates to the early years, where these behaviors are being interpreted as a problem. And so that has resulted in students being streamed below expectations and also put into behavioral classes, and behavioral IEPs being developed. On the flip side, when we look at like neurodivergence and the support we need for students, we do need that support in the early years. So that's another thing that I think needs to be reevaluated is, yes, we there are problems with instating those early years IEPs that are just based on the subjective opinions of educators. But also, I have two children who have ADHD. They both have IEPs, and they are legal documents that are required to be followed in order to support their needs in the school. And we have had an amazingly supportive experience in our school, but that is not the case for, I would say, most parents. I have the privilege of, when my children were very young, spending more time in the school building, so that if there were an issue, a behavioral issue, particularly with my son, I was there to be able to support. And that's not the case. So we need, for most people, so we need to make sure that their proper training and supports are in place, to help those students thrive. And with the government funding cuts, it's really important to have trustees who are on side with that. We have lost an overwhelming amount of resources to support those students. And so, it's a constant championing, I think, of the need to improve the support for students in terms of tangible supports, as well as staff and, professional development for educators. With respect to masking in schools, my mom is in long-term care, so we are very cautious in our family. We'll see how it plays out with the impact that it's having on schools and the health of our community. What I'm seeing right now is a lot of absences and staffing issues due to illness. And of course, I am very concerned about my immunocompromised family member. My children are wearing masks in their classrooms. I wear masks indoors still, but I do understand that there are impacts, mental health and physical health impacts for people to continue to wear them constantly. So that is our choice. And I would follow personally public health guidelines as a trustee.
Great, thank you. I'd love to ask Sara if you wanted to add anything to any of Alexis's responses, because I know you have some similar priorities. And then I also see a hand up, so Karen has a question, but Sara, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I just say for anti-Black racism and support for neurodiverse students, I'll just say I'm here for it. I agree that we're going to need to do organizing for more funding. Like that is what we are challenged by the funding envelope. And if elected trustee, that is a challenge I will be faced with more actively than I am today. I also just want to credit, like, Alexis, I saw you on GTA councils recently, just like the big and the small. You have such an ability to talk about the big broad, but then also to dig into very specific policies. You were going into who was available to provide learning opportunities in the classroom, like guest speakers, and the list that the TDSB provides, and making sure that those lists are more diverse and that there's easier access to people from diverse communities. I think the specific example is from a Caribbean community background there. So I feel like my role as a white woman, if elected trustee, is to listen and to amplify those messages. And I'm hearing the calls for more work to be done, like strategic broad work, but also systemically across the work of the board. I am hearing that within our community. That is what Toronto Danforth wants in a trustee. And so I'm here for that. I also want to say that I'm hearing about police being involved in our schools and all sorts of side roadways. And that's a discussion that I'm there for. I support the calls to keep police out of our schools. And we need to be vigilant of all the ways that when board policies are set, that there is active work to backtrack on those commitments. And so we always have to go look back and seek not to lose ground while we're trying to gain ground. And so I'm there for that as well. And I just say on masking, I'm also actively masking indoors and encouraging my child to mask. We're worried. We're gonna have to see what the whole trustee composition is and build knowledge and awareness. My hope is that we've been really mandate masks or don't say anything about masks, just sort of have them passively hidden on the corner. I'd like for us to be able to embrace some complexity over the next few years as a community and as a society. We don't have to wear masks perfectly all the time for them to make a difference and ultimately save lives in our community. And I'm hopeful. I believe our community can embrace complex messages and try to do hard things, like trying not to be to try to navigate and wear masks more, even without a mandate. And that's something I hope that we can achieve. Those that can, I hope we will. That's it.
Thank you. So I see that Karen, you have a hand up. Would you like to ask your question?
I thought I should turn my camera on too, so you could see a face. Hi. First of all, thank you so much to the three of you for running. Like I mean, women in politics, Black women in politics, like I know it's tough and it's not something I would ever have the guts to do. So thank you so much. Jenny, I also live just north of the hospital, so maybe I'll see you around in the neighborhood. You've got my vote. As for Alexis and Sara, like again, school, I've got two little ones. My youngest is not in the school system yet, but was just diagnosed with autism. So Alexis, you're talking about the IEPs and the fact that you had a good experience is really great, but I also know that's generally not the case, as you said. So I'm kind of nervous heading into next year. This is something I wish I'd researched before this call, but in terms of trustees, like what is your sphere of influence? Like where are you listened to? And then where are your hands kind of tied in terms of influencing the way schools sort of change or don't change.
So do you want me to take a stab at that first? You're speaking broadly in general or specific to
Broadly,
spec ed?
yeah, so just in terms of, like, another example is similar to Sarah. My eldest did virtual school with the TDSB for the past 2 years. So again, I kind of saw the day, saw two teachers working extremely hard with the best of intent, but often like I felt like there was a lack of training around gender diversity, like a lot of use of boys and girls. So I'd kind of communicate offline with them. And then another teacher who was trying their best but didn't really know how to talk to Indigenous issues, like on Orange Shirt Day and that kind of thing. Like, do you have influence over teacher training, also over the masking piece? Because yes, I would be very pro-mask, a mask mandate being reinstated in schools. And Sarah, you talked about getting the numbers, like where all the different trustees align. How does that work in terms of influencing change or maybe not being able to?
So, in a nutshell, trustees are policy and staff are operations, right? So we wouldn't be involved in like individual school level issues when it comes to a particular teacher or administrator or whatever. But it is important that parents follow the concern protocol with their individual issues. So starting with the classroom teacher, then the principal, then the superintendent, and then the trustee. And the thing about, alerting a trustee to your complaint is, there's a system of accountability there. So we have, weekly or however, every trustee is different, but when I did it, I was having weekly meetings with the superintendent and kept a spreadsheet of all the parent complaints basically. And so then at that time we can follow up, how is this going, how is that going, but ultimately when it comes to school operations, it is under the portfolio of staff. When trustees make policies, it is important for us to actually work with staff because the end game is the impact in schools, right? That's what'll make a difference. So you can have all these amazing pie in the sky hypothetical policies. If they don't actually translate to children, then you haven't done your job. So it is very important for the trustees to work with the various levels of staff in order to get buy-on, in order to get feedback on how a particular policy should be worded or positioned or framed in order that they are, adequately worded and covered all of the, important areas so that they can be operationalized in a way that's effective. The rollout is of any policy differs by school. I can say that absolutely with my work in schools. If you look at something like the Human Rights Reporting Portal, the good schools have a ton of reports. The schools that are really struggling have hardly any reports. And so, the principals, it's that shift in mindset to more of a growth mindset where it's like, how are we going to get to this end goal? Reporting the incidents and calling in the infrastructure and the support is absolutely critical. So it's not really a good thing. I worry the most about the schools that have very few reports because we know the systemic issues are broad-based. They're not, school by school. So I would say that in policy, there is a lack of systems of accountability and that needs to be improved. So, that is one of the things that I absolutely will be looking at and challenging is when we create these policies, how are they operationalized? How are people accountable? And so an effective example of that is when the TDSB, again, was looking at the suspension and expulsions data and determining that Black students were being suspended most often for breach of conduct or behavioral issues. There's now an actual measure in the system where they can't even log in that reason code, before having a conversation with the superintendent. So that increases accountability. Even if you have a problematic admin that's discriminatory, they can't go ahead and be that anymore because they have to have a conversation with their boss before logging it in. And the boss is going to ask a list of questions that will hold that person to account if there's any, kind of discriminatory practices that have influenced their decision. So that is an example of an effective system of accountability that has actually impacted data outcomes. And there's been, since that was implemented, a 10% reduction in student suspensions for Black students over the course of 2 years. As far as spec ed goes, it's important for parents to understand the process. And I think that the TDSB and the government, it's a provincial process once you get to a certain point of needing an IEP. So your son is going to need an IEP with an autism diagnosis. In the early years, that can be a conversation. Usually it's around a safety plan. So you would have an in-school support team meeting. So it's called an IST meeting. That is the meeting that you have right out of the gate. So that's like, you're going to want to book that within the first week of school to make sure that those supports are in place. And a good teacher would, it's to their benefit. They don't want your child to run off the property. So, that's critical. The next meeting would be a school support team meeting, an SST. So that is when there's a broader pool of resources that are centrally assigned resources within the TDSB Spec Ed department that come and collectively meet and create more of a robust plan. And that plan may include, additional supports. Sometimes those supports can't be leveraged without a formal IEP. So you have a diagnosis, you would then go to an IPRC meeting, and I think it's called Independent Program Review Committee meeting. And at that meeting, if your child needs a placement in a different type of classroom to support their needs, that would be when those decisions are made. So can we meet the needs of this child in a regular classroom with supports, or do they need to have another smaller classroom where they would be potentially bused to a different school in order to have a supportive environment with a smaller class size to meet their needs? So I would say that the system is effective, but you as a parent have to know all the steps. You have to follow all the steps. You can't try and skip over them. That won't work in your favor. And when you speak with your superintendent or your trustee, they will always refer you back down the line to the protocol. So it's important for parents to be informed and on how to navigate the system. And that again is the community engagement piece of my platform, where I often, as just an individual volunteer who's made myself accessible, are having these conversations with parents and giving you my verbal advice. But it's, the school board can do a much better job of equipping parents to have these conversations, because at the end of the day, it's a home and school partnership. Whatever's being done at school, you can then leverage at home. Whatever you're doing at home, if the school knows what your best practices are at home, then they can also implement them in the class. So, it's about communication. It's about parents, having an understanding of the system, and it's about the system working to the benefit of parents, of students, irrespective of their parents' ability to navigate and engage. So that's my very long-winded response.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I want to make sure that we get to the question that was in the chat. So this question is from Devin for Jenny. In terms of municipally controlled taxes, such as property tax, would you vote to increase taxes, decrease taxes, or be committed to keeping them the same?
I get this question a lot, and I'm a firm believer in the fact that, in the reality that we have to pay for the things that we want to do. And the city has been very, very reluctant to explore the full suite of revenue tools available to us. So one of the first things I would like to see is a greater commitment to exploring some of the other revenue tools that we have not explored or that we've rejected outright, that we used to have and got rid of. I want to see us looking at congestion charges. I want to see us looking at bringing back the vehicle registration tax. These are tools that brought in millions of dollars to city coffers to help support the programs. That said, we also need to recognize in Toronto, and this is a bitter pill to swallow, that within the city of Toronto, our property taxes have been kept artificially low. They're low compared to everywhere in Ontario, not just the GTA. And we are trying to do more on less money, and we have squeezed that stone until it bled. So I would be in favor of raising our property taxes to bring them into line with what the rest of our neighbors in the GTA are paying in order to fund the city that we want and the city that we need.
Thank you. Okay, that basically brings us to 1 o'clock. It's 12:58. So unless anyone has an extremely quick question that can be wrapped up in 2 minutes, I think we will leave it there. So I really want to thank you all, Alexis, Jenny, and Sarah, for coming and sharing everything with us, getting us all inspired. And so for anyone who's on this call, you have lots of ways that you can get involved, and the candidates did give us some of that information. Vote, obviously. I see there are links that are being posted into the chat, so that's great. Everyone here has their campaign page. Please consider volunteering with a campaign. There's tons of volunteer jobs that can be done. Jenny really wants you to volunteer. Lots of things from, canvassing and flyering and calling people, and lots of different things you can do. Have conversations with your neighbors, see what's going on with them, contact the candidates to let them know what your priorities are. All of those kinds of things can be done. And after the election is done and the dust settles, then the real work begins. So really looking forward to seeing what all of you can do if you are elected. And yeah, thank you. Any last words from any of you?
I just want to say thank you so much for having us. This has been amazing. I've also really learned a lot from Jenny and Sarah. So this was amazing. I also want to give a plug for donations. It costs a lot to run an effective campaign. We, have people running against us, and some of them have a lot more money. I refuse to put myself into debt in my own campaign, and I understand that historically trustee campaigns can be, are historically self-funded by a lot of the candidates. I actually was very surprised to hear how many. And so just to give you an idea, a large lawn sign costs between, $16 and $25 depending. And so, even if you have $5, $10, $20 to contribute, a little goes a long way. That's how Obama did it. I hope we could do it that way too. So not necessarily my campaign, but take a look at your local, candidates and, make a choice from there if you can put some dollars toward it. Otherwise, encourage your friends, but donations are key. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm going to jump on that, trustees have an uphill battle because we don't have a generous rebate program, and we can only accept funding from individuals who live in Ontario. So we do have an uphill battle. There is no rebate program. So please consider giving to us. But I really want to put a plug in for Jenny here too, because there's an extremely generous rebate program. If you have money now, you do the paperwork and you get like 75% of it back next year. You have till December, and you get a check in the mail from the City of Toronto, and it's well after, and you can do fabulous things with that money once you get it back. And so I really consider making a very generous donation to the councillors that you want as well. And I hope you want Jennie Worden as much as I do, because
thank you.
There's a very generous rebate. And then for the trustee campaigns, note you won't have a rebate, but all of the trustees will be forever grateful if you support Progressive Voices for Trustees.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank you all.
so after 1 o'clock, so let's wrap. Thank you again, everyone, for coming, and have a great afternoon.
Have a dance break.